Hi, I'm Joe,
And I'm Dave.
and we're the hosts of the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, where we bring you stories that delve into the science and spirit behind intriguing people doing extraordinary things.
On today's Chasing Tomorrow podcast, episode 8, we are super stoked to have an Olympic bobsledder with us. Her name's Riz. Her real name is Alicia Risling, and we are super stoked to talk to her about her experiences bobsledding, piloting, being one of the world's best pilots with the sport of bobsled, and competing in the 2018 Winter Olympic Games as a member of Team Canada and finishing 6th place. Riz, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to be here this morning. Beautiful morning.
Yeah, looks like it, Riz. Hey, thanks again for getting on the show. You know, I think all of us are always curious sort of about the Olympic journey. So what I'd love to hear a little bit about is, when was the first time you really thought, I could be an Olympian? And tell us a little bit about your history as to how you ended up, at the top of the track in the Olympics in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because every single person, especially in my sledding sports, the bobsleds and the skeletons, we all have such different stories, and mine's even more different, I'd say, than most of the athletes. So bobsled is a sport that when I got into it 9 years ago, you had to be an adult at full maturity to be in the sport. So for me, getting into the sport at 22, turning 23, I wasn't that far behind the curve, because that's actually when most athletes join. Most athletes come from other sports, other university careers. A lot of the guys come from CFL or Team Canada Track and Field, and then they transition. I was a basketball player. So I played basketball at University of Alberta. I had been on the track team as well in my first year, and I didn't get into the master's program that I was aiming for. And rather than take another year off school once I had graduated with my first degree, I decided that I really missed being an athlete. And the moment that I decided that I was going to pursue this crazy sport that I knew absolutely nothing about, was I'd woken up. It was around noon because I was working in a bar, and I'd come downstairs, and I probably went to bed at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and turned on the TV, and it was the opening ceremonies for the London Olympic Games. And I just happened to turn it on as they were starting the parade of athletes. So all the countries were walking in, and at the time I was kind of at a crossroads in my life. I was not sure what I was going to do next, but I knew that I was going nowhere in what I was doing at the time. So I decided that I had been an athlete my whole life, and the one thing that I never even contemplated pursuing was the Olympics. I wasn't a good enough basketball player to ever make our national basketball team, especially at that time. That's when our girls started to get really good. And I never pursued track and field after I quit my first year. So I was kind of wondering, I was like, well, I had heard about this crazy sport called bobsled that had previously recruited a bunch of girls that I knew in my third year of university. So actually, as I was watching these opening ceremonies, I got on the computer and I emailed down to Calgary. I was living in Edmonton still at the time, and I asked them how you even get involved. And 2 weeks later, I went to an identification camp, and 6 weeks later, I tried out for Team Alberta. And from the first time I went down the track the first time to 5.5 years later, standing at the top of the Olympic track in South Korea. It was a pretty crazy, quick journey. Flew by, and there's a lot of speed bumps along the way, that's for sure. But yeah, missing a medal by 0.7 seconds was enough for me to say, we got to do this again, try again, the next time get up on the podium.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome, Riz. And so, I mean, the very first time that, you tried bobsled, you were standing at the top of the track. Tell me about your feelings and thoughts. I mean, did you think, hey, this is a sport that I was built for? Or I'm terrified, I have no idea what I'm doing, this might be a terrible life choice. So tell me about some of those thoughts.
Well, a little bit Not quite like that, because the only things that I knew about the sport of bobsled, I didn't know how you won a race. I didn't know how the equipment worked. I didn't know really anything about it, other than the fact that good bobsled athletes were very strong, fast, and powerful. And as a basketball athlete, that actually was my strength. So I actually was a horrible shooter, if you talk to my university coach. But I was just athletic. So I was the person who could out rebound everyone. I would beat anyone down the court, and my point guard would just throw me the ball because I would be so far ahead of everyone. I could just run down and do a layup. Like, I was just so quick. Um, and I had pretty good vertical and like stuff like that. So I just knew I had the athletic qualities that would be good to be a bobsledder. The other thing I knew was that that to be good, the training for bobsled was sprinting and powerlifting, and those are the things that I loved to do. Like, when instead of going in shooting 100 jump shots, I was in the weight room doing Olympic lifts, power lifts, and like that was the part that I loved the training for it. So I knew that naturally, even about the sport of bobsled itself, like going down the track is such a small piece of what it takes to be a good bobsledder. But I really did enjoy doing the rest of the components. So hopefully it would fit together. And then after my first trip down the track, I'm pretty sure I was in the back seat of a girl who was a brand new driver, and I'm pretty sure we hit every single wall. And I got to the bottom, ripped my helmet off, and I had the biggest smile on my face. And when you hit a wall in bobsled, it sounds like a shotgun going off. So people standing at the bottom of the track can hear that. And so they had heard how horrible the run was going down. And when I got to the bottom, they were like, man, if you have a smile on your face after that run, this is the right sport for you. So I knew that I was in the right spot, that's for sure. And I've always been a bit of a daredevil, so it was a natural transition for me.
That does sound like fascinating. I like this idea, we'll call it from 0 to 100 in 5.5 years. You did it very quickly. You had some foundation. What was the hardest part of that period from, okay, I like this, to getting into the Olympics? So training, there's I have to imagine it's competitive, that, you got to learn a lot too, because as you said, you didn't even know how the sport worked. And then you even became a pilot, which brings another level of skill. So along the way, what were some of the hard parts of making that journey happen?
Yeah, so when I do my public speaking, that's kind of what I do. And I focus on every year, there seemed to be some sort of adversity. And it was a little bit different from year to year. So that first year I was a brakeman. So, and I barely squeaked on to Team Alberta, which is the development to the development level. So kind of like the entry level to the sport, kind of more, everyone's just doing it for fun. Everyone's doing it for fun with the hope that they'll get better so that they can move up the ladder. But that's when I had to learn, I had to learn how to take care of the equipment. I had to learn how you practice, how you train, what's the important parts about going down the track, how do you be a good brakeman, what is the role of the pilot. And I also learned that was the year that I figured out that it's the pilot that qualifies the sled for the Olympics. If the pilot doesn't slide that day, the sled doesn't go down the track. If the brakeman's sick or the brakeman is injured, they get subbed out and a new girl can get in the sled, and it's business as usual. I saw 3 girls that had been on the national level team. So now that I'm in the sport, I can see within the program what's going on. And they had put 3 years of their lives, dedication of literal blood, sweat, and tears. And the Olympic year rolls around, and another athlete comes from another sport who is quicker than them on the day of team trials, and they lost their Olympic spot by 1/100th of a second. Like, that's how cutthroat it can be. And I knew that if I was going to put my further education on hold and my career goals on hold to pursue the sport and to try and become an Olympian, I was going to have to do it from the front seat, because I knew that I would never be the fastest or the strongest girl on the team. It's just, I'm a well-balanced athlete. I'm just not that one. I'd say I'm the 1%, but I'm not that 0.5% that's going to be the best of the best. So if I could just do enough to get me into that 1% and then learn the skill of piloting the sled, that was going to be the difference of if I was going to make it, it was going to be whether or not I was good enough pilot. So then I was taking a lot more of the onus on me, and I wouldn't leave it up to fate that I could put in, at the time it would have been 4 more years until the next Olympic year, and leave it up to chance that I was going to be the best athlete that day. So I decided that I was gonna go for it and learn how to pilot the sled. So if we want to just go chronologically, the first year, the biggest challenge I had was learning how to drive the sled. Most athletes take, if they have any sort of decent skill level and understanding of feedback of the sled, they maybe get in a handful of crashes their entire lives. I was in 12 my first year.
Wow.
So yeah, and that was the thing. Like, people are like, well, you suck. Like, why are you even bothering? Like, you're not gonna be good. And I just had this self-belief, like this kind of like underwhelming belief in myself that, I wasn't gonna justify it to anyone else because I did suck. Like, but I just knew that if I could keep sticking with it, I've always been a little bit of a slower learner when it comes to the cognitive side of sport. I knew I was going to be able to figure it out, and it took me 2 years, but I did kind of figure it out it took me 2 years before I won my first North American level race. So that would be the development team with the national development team. The second year I was told I was never going to make the national development team because I didn't have the physical ability. I showed up, I got my own trainer, and I showed up 8 months later, and at the time was the fastest athlete in the program, to prove them wrong. My third year, I was told that I was going to go to the World Cup and race against some of the best athletes in the world. And at the time, I was driving a sled that was made in 2011, still a great sled, but it was a Ford, and the athletes I was going to race were driving Ferraris. So even though I was proving I could push the sled and I was proving I could drive the sled, I was now going to be in an inferior equipment, and it takes all 3 of those things, the push, the drive, and the equipment, to win a race. So I went and got my own. Now, I didn't have $91,000 lying around, so that was kind of the biggest adversity I had there, was fundraising and trying to come up with a plan on how to. I had to become a business. I had to learn something that I hadn't even studied in school. So it just seemed like every single year there was something. And then the year before the Olympic Games, I actually suffered from a brutal bout of overtraining syndrome, and I put myself through menopause. That's how undetectable my sex hormones were, just from me just becoming this. I morphed into this crazy person, I'd say, because I was trying to be the perfect athlete. And that's when I really had to learn that the perfect athlete doesn't exist, and it's all about finding the perfect balance of how to make yourself the best athlete. And so that almost lost me my Olympic spot there the year before. So was able to battle back through that, and then get to the games and do well. I was really proud of my overall performance there. It just wasn't good enough to win, and that's why it's been since then. I've had a 7-centimeter tear in my calf that set me back and held me out of the season last year, and now we're dealing with COVID. So it just seems like every year there's something that's going on, and something that you have to fight through. But it does, at the end of the day, make you a better human being, and does make you a better athlete.
You bet, Riz.
They would know all about this.
It creates resiliency, doesn't it? And
Absolutely.
that's one thing that I consistently see in you. And of course, this is why we called you and said, hey, we got to have you on. We got to have you on. Now, Riz, let's back it up to piloting for a second, because not only when you mentioned the amount of crashes that you've ended up having, and you've told me in length, and I maybe want to kind of dig this out of you a little bit more about these crashes. And you brought up a lot of worry and concern as well too, because when you crash with 3 other women behind you, and you're responsible for them, right? And so do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Because I know that with numerous crashes, there has been some concern of at what point am I putting these other women's health at risk, and on and so forth. But so tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So sorry, just to clarify. So women, even though I was the first woman to compete as a 4-woman bobsled in an international race, in the Olympic Games, we only competed in the 2-man event. So I actually haven't driven a 4-man sled since 2016 because we didn't get it into the Olympic Games. Going towards the 2022 Games, we're going to have the two-man event, and we're also going to have a new sport called monobob. Now, monobob was created for the para athletes and for juniors, so we could get kids into sleds at the age of 16 instead of 18. And now it's a women's Olympic sport. The men compete in the two-man, and they also compete in four-man, and that's kind of like the pinnacle of the Olympic Games. I think when you think about the Winter Games, you think of hockey and four-man bobsled. And the four-man is, if you've seen Cool Runnings, of course, everybody, that's such a classic movie. You need to watch it. It's on Netflix. The Jamaican bobsled team.
Yes.
But so when I crash my sled, my two-man sled, I have somebody else in the back. And usually when you get in a crash, so we travel at speeds between 125 and 150 kilometers an hour. When you crash a bobsled, you are in a carbon fiber bullet that has nothing but metal on the inside. It's metal frame. So if you're going in, for instance, my favorite place to crash, not my favorite, but place it always seems to happen is Whistler, my home track. We're going, that's the fastest track in the world. And we're going on average more there, 145 to 150 kilometers an hour. Now, if you think about getting in a car accident going 150 kilometers an hour, it's usually catastrophic, and we're not wearing seatbelts. And we literally are in this bullet-shaped carbon fiber box rolling upside down and back again. And either way, it sucks because it's not like you just crash and then you end. The sled is traveling with such speed that when you crash, the brakes are upside down or they're on their side, so you can't even dig them into the ground to be able to stop the sled. So you have to ride that sled all the way to the bottom, regardless of where you crash on the track, whether you're crashing corner 2 or corner 12 at the bottom. So when I crash as a pilot, and you won't be able to see it on Zoom, but my hands are just covered in scars. We flip over. I try and push myself into the nose of the sled. So I kind of wrap myself up. I end up usually bleeding all down my knees and knuckles from pushing into the top of the sled, trying to hold myself up. The girl on the back doesn't really have anywhere to go because they're kind of tucked over like a sandwich. And when the sled flips, their butts usually move them forward. So they end up dragging more often than not the back of the helmet. They try not to, but sometimes you just get pinned, or the back of their shoulder blades on the ice. When you're going at those speeds and your shoulders are dragging the ice can actually burn you, severely burn you. I've seen people have to go get skin grafts. So we wear Kevlar vests called burn vests. And I've seen people get injured even through their Kevlar vests, just depending on the type of crash. Ideally, you don't want anything more to happen than you get banged up a little bit. Usually most girls will walk out of a sled covered in bruises. Some guys can walk away with nothing because they're so big, they just hold themselves out. But the men and the women drive the same sled. So the women usually aren't quite as wide. So you tend to get bounced around a little bit more. There's been a couple times where we've crashed and I didn't see it coming as a pilot. Usually you see it coming, but sometimes you don't. And those are usually the bad ones for the pilot, because those are usually ones where you're going into a corner and your front bunk will like clip and you'll roll into the corner, instead of where you think most things you just set yourself up incorrectly and you roll out of a corner. Those are the ones you normally see coming, but the ones that you clip your bunk and roll in. Justin Cripps, my teammate who won gold in 2018, he actually rolled into a corner in Sochi in his first Olympics as a pilot in 2014. Wow. And your head gets stuck outside the sled. So now the sled's upside down and your head's out, and you've got this big bubble head because you've got a big helmet on, and your head kind of smashes the wall the entire way down. So I've ended up with first degree whiplash, I think 3 times now. So those ones aren't very fun. But yeah, so when you crash as a pilot, it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to drive the sled down. It's your responsibility to go down with speed, but safe. And so when you get in these crashes, and every time I'm like, the first thing I think about when we crash is, I hope she's okay, regardless of who's in the back of my sled, because it just sucks. Like, it's just an unfortunate thing. And unfortunately it's part of the sport too. And everybody understands that. But at the end of the day, like that's where my head goes. It's not, oh, I made a mistake. My head goes, I hope my brakeman's okay. Because it's just human nature, I think, too, to try and be protective over those who are who are helping you out and your teammates, and like those are your friends. So it sucks. Getting in a crash sucks. Nobody likes it. And
But part of this,
more often than not, they're safe, but it's part of the sport, and people do get injured. It's a high risk, and again, this is why it's a sport that you do as an adult, not a child.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for the non-metric listeners, 150 kilometers an hour is 90 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So think of your 90-mile-an-hour fall out of a car. No one would be happy with that at all.
Yeah. No.
So that's certainly, you can feel listening to that, how scary that would be. But I think that's sort of what we push ourselves to. The start is also really interesting because I guess a good part of the race is decided at that start in this very short period of time. As I understand, we have a few seconds to make the difference. I mean, we might think seconds, you're probably thinking hundreds of seconds, generating a lot of power. We've watched bobsled, and there's this like right before that it looks like, you know, bobsledders put their minds to it and like ready, set, really go and get yourself wound up. Tell us a little bit about, you know, what goes through your head when you're right before you start. You know, you've done a lot of training and now I got to push as hard as I can. Do you also, in the last point is, when you jump back into sled, do you know you had a good time when you started? Just tell me from that part. It'd be great to hear.
That's a good question, actually. So the start of the bobsled, so as I said before, you need three things to win a race. So we've talked about the equipment a little bit. You need the smoothest drive, and that push is the third piece. And no one really knows if it's like 33%, 0.333 for each one, or if one has a little bit more than the other. I will tell you that there's some tracks that we know for sure that what you push, what number you push in is pretty much where you come down in the race. So that one's in Eagles, Austria. And I think a lot of that one has to do with because that track is so simple, that it's a beginner's track is what we'll call it. So basically, if you don't push fast there, you're not going to win because everyone can drive it. Where some tracks are a little bit more technical, where the pilot's ability will overcome a deficit at the start.
Right.
So the push is just so important, and it's something that Team Canada stresses. Like, we don't make the team unless we can be one of the top pushing teams in the world. They won't advance us to the next level, to the national development team or the national team. So the push is 50 meters. So a misconception about the sledding sports is a lot of people think that the grooves that are pretty much train tracks down, and the sled just follows the train tracks down the sled or down the track. My apologies. But that is not the case. So the top of the track where bobsled and skeleton start from, because we both start as pushing athletes, luge starts as a paddle athlete. So luge starts on their back and they paddle, and then they'll just lean back. Bobsled and skeleton will start pushing, and they each start outside their sled, and then bobsled gets in the sled, skeleton gets on top of the sled. Skeleton's when they go head first. So the grooves go for the first 50 meters of the track. You can push the sled as far as you want. However, if you are still pushing that sled when the grooves run out, you're unstable. It's open ice. So now you're running on ice that a sled could just move sideways. And that's kind of like the worst case thing that you could do. You always want to be in the sled and down before those grooves run out, because if there's any movement at the top of the track, right as the sled's kind of coming out of those grooves, you risk the chance of skidding. A skid will kill your velocity. It will actually ruin everything that you've done at the beginning. And even though your push time might look really good, your velocity will be poor because you've wrecked the thing. So by the next timing eye, you'll be behind, even if you've had a really fast push. So the really important things that we're looking for on the start of the bobsled is the time, the actual push time, and the velocity that you can create. You want to accelerate the sled as much as possible. As a pilot, I pushed for about 30 meters because I have to get in first, because just the way the sleds are set up, they're so tight that if I don't get my feet through first, I risk not being able to get in the sled once the brakeman's already in there. So she's not allowed to get in until I'm in. I pushed for about 30 of those meters, and literally we say, like, on a race push, as soon as the pilot's in, like as soon as you see the pilot jumping to get in, that's when the brakeman takes her last step, and she tries to like long jump in through the back of the sled. So the pilot has to jump over the side, the brakeman jumps through the back. And we are fighting for hundredths of a second. Every hundredth counts. They say, and this isn't the true for every single track, just because every track is so different, but on average, 100th at the top will be 300th at the bottom, or like a tenth at the top will be 3/10 at the bottom. So our races sometimes are won and lost by 100th of a second. So every 100th counts. So that's why we're fighting for those. However, it is really important. Some of the tracks, and this is kind of like I hope nobody that's not Canadian doesn't listen to this, because our strategy is we'll sacrifice 100th at the top for an extra tenth worth of velocity. So that means if we can get in sooner and be a little bit shorter on the time at the top, but have a faster velocity, it will magnify itself by the second timing eye already. So it's worth it. So that means instead of running 30 meters, maybe I take one step less and get in before, because the risk of running it too far or too long is that now the sled's going faster than you can actually run. And when you go to jump in, you might accidentally pull the sled back and you'll sacrifice some of your velocity. So there's just so many little things that go into it. And these are all feeling things. They're not something that we will video from the bottom of the start ramp and the top of the start ramp and just look at technique and we'll look at our push times. We'll look at our push velocities on our training times and just try and find that sweet spot where you're magnifying both the velocity and the time to do best. And like another question you were asking was, can you tell? And I don't say you can't tell the exact time. You never know the exact time, but you definitely know when it feels good versus when it doesn't. Yeah. And especially on our race day, when I'm going into the corner one, into that first corner, because I get in and I take a big breath, because I go from being a strength power athlete to a finesse athlete. I essentially go from being a power lifter to a golfer once I get in the sled, because I just let my hands kind of take over. But I can tell going into that first time, like, we're going fast right now. So then there's no better feeling than that.
Are you counting your steps to know when to jump in?
Another good question. Some athletes do. I'd say actually most of the men, especially when they're doing the 4-man, because the pilot would have to run even shorter on the 4-man. 4 guys pushing a sled is going to accelerate much faster. You can't run it quite as fast. And then also you have to account for 4 guys getting into the sled, not just the 2. So they do. So I'd say most men on 4-man will count their steps. And usually they'll run about 12 to 15. I know on some tracks, and our coaches do talk to us as if we're counting our steps, and some athletes do. I don't. For me, it's all feeling, because the minute I start counting, I'm not thinking about push as fast as I can. So I don't. I just trust my feeling.
Yeah, so let's talk about mindset, Riz, for a second. So 2 things popped up, and I was just going to ask you about mindset when it came to being at the top of the track, calming your mind, and push. But, so I want to know about that, about, some of your tricks and tips to be able to put yourself into that space, but then also that transition, like you were just saying, that once you get, in the bobsled, you have to take a deep breath, because you're no longer a pushing athlete, you're a finesse athlete. So those 2 transitions, any tricks you can give our audience?
Yeah. So I do. The biggest thing I've realized that I need going into a race is confidence. And that has to be that confidence in myself. And I get that in the week. I do that. I get my confidence from my training. So during the week, the first day that I get to a new track. So every time we go to a new track on tour, I get 3 days of official training, in which each day I'll get 2 trips down the track. And then on that final day, it'll be the race. And the race is a combination of 2 heats. And you want to have the lowest combined time. So you want to be the fastest person down the track, 2 heats, or you don't have to be. You could be the fastest person in 1 and the 5th fastest. But if everyone else, like, it's weird how it works out, just your total combined time. So my first day I get a new track, I have a similar mindset every week. My first day is, I'm not worried about the push at all. So I usually don't take my racing brakeman down the first day. It's memory recollection, it's remembering the track, it's figuring out if there's any if the track is maybe cut a little bit different since the last time I was there. If there's any, like, sometimes I go to, for instance, St. Moritz every year is a track we go to in Switzerland, and it's made out of natural ice and snow. And every time we go down there, it is a little bit different. The corners all go the same way, but just the setup into each corner is a little bit different. So sometimes I want to go tight to the right wall. Sometimes I want to go tight to the left wall. Sometimes I want to go dead down the middle. So my first day is really just about remembering that track, remembering the feeling, remembering what the timing feels like on the way down. I'm not at all concerned about the push. So that's the first day. And then the second day will be, if there's any corners that are giving me difficulty, really just focusing on those two corners and perfecting what I want to do in those corners. And then the third day, my driving coach likes to call it the polish day. So the third day is the day you go down, you pretty much do it like a race day. It's a mini race in your head. You go down, you execute your driving plan. If something doesn't go according to plan, you remember why. So you're able to keep that in your brain. And then we usually have a day off in between, like before, and then it will be race day. So on race day, my mindset is always the same. So when I wake up in the morning, I'm a pilot. When I get to the track, I'm a pilot. I do my mind runs. So for me, they say it takes 10,000 hours to perfect your craft. I only get to go through each corner for like a second or two every day. So I'm never going to even get to 10,000 hours in my career. Like, yeah, I'd have to bobsled my entire life, multiple days, multiple times on every single track for me to really be an expert, right? So visualization is such an important key, is just seeing the track. And when I do my visualizations, I always do it perfectly. Unless there's a dangerous corner. And if that dangerous corner, I know while I'm going into it, not perfectly, I have my emergency steer in the background. So occasionally I'll run it through perfect. I'll run it through maybe once or twice with that emergency steer, that my plan B, my backup plan, and then I'll go back to doing it perfectly because I want it to be crisp and perfect in my brain. And then I always walk the track on race day. Most days we walk up the track on race day. I walk down to save my legs. And mostly it's just to get away from everybody else. There's a lot of action in the start house because all the spares are there. Everybody's getting the sleds ready to go. And it's kind of a nice option to just kind of get away from it and get your brain in the right position. And then when I get back to the top and I start doing my warm up, my brain turns off. I'm done. I'm no longer a pilot. I'm a brakeman, because my mantra is one corner at a time. And I can't get to the first corner without having a great push. So I have to trust myself that I've done the work through the week. I've done all the mental preparation during the week so that on race day, it just becomes about execution. And to be honest, for the most part, I black out. Like, it's just, once I put my helmet on and I put my visor down, that's my blinders. That's my racehorse blinders. And all that matters to me is what's directly in front of me. So that's how I approach my mindset for any kind of race like that.
Wow, that's great. Sort of almost we get the feeling of what it would be like, although we'll never get to experience it at that level. I'm always sort of curious, you're running on these really thin blades and you're going at these high speeds. I imagine that it's very fine movements that you're making, right? To be able to make these turns, and too much of an exaggerated movement would, cause trouble, I imagine, right? Mm-hmm. So what is that like? Just to tell us a little bit. First, are you holding a steering wheel? Is it paddles? How does it steer? And then, like, how little movement is it for you to make these turns?
Another great question. So I'm holding a lever pulley system. So the front blades, so the blades on the bottom of the on the sled are called runners, and they're interchangeable. There are rules of how thin or how thick they can be. Depending on the track is how I choose which, and not just the track, but also the ice conditions that day. Is it snowing? If it's snowing, there's snow in the track, I might go on thinner blades because they'll cut through the snow better. Is it really warm and is the ice soft? Then I'm going to go thicker because I don't want the ice or the blades to dig in too much. That's actually going to slow me down. Yep. So that is a huge key also in runner selection, can win and lose you a race too. Mm-hmm. You can have the best drive of your day and the fastest push and be in the best equipment, but if you go on the wrong blades, you can't win either. So it's another really important thing. And the preparation that we do, we spend 3 hours polishing them by hand. So the front axle is connected to the front two blades. And so when I pull my left runner, it goes left. And when I pull my right runner, it goes right. my hands, I sit in my lap. I hold their D rings, so they're separate, but I actually have mine taped together a little bit further back. And on most tracks, the most movement I'll ever do is like this.
Wow.
That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
On some tracks, I steer more like this, and if I'm in trouble, I'm full pinning. Like, for the love of God, please get off this corner. Like, usually if I'm pulling like this, something's gone horribly wrong, and we're no longer trying to get down the track fast. We're just trying to save it, get down on 4 runners. So yeah, like a track like here in Calgary where I am, it's just, when I go down, it's this much. And the more you steer, the more friction you create. So you're actually slowing yourself down. You're just trying to manipulate the sled enough that, my example in Korea is the speed that we got in Korea. I think they kind of underestimated what we'd be doing. So some of the corners, it wouldn't carry us around the corner enough at the speed we were. We were still going 136 kilometers an hour, but it wasn't quite, the corners were longer than, so the corner would want to spit you out right directly into the wall. Whereas if you could stay on the corner a little bit longer and come out the middle. So I actually had to steer up in 3 of the corners in Korea, which was crazy because until the Korean track happened, the Olympic track, there was no other corner that I had experienced that before. Whereas the more so I learned how to drive primarily on the 4 North American tracks just because of logistics. And then when I got to Europe, a lot of the corners, even though they might have been, so this corner might have been similar to Lake 5 and corner 5 in Lake Placid. And this corner on the same track might have been very similar to corner 3 in Whistler. So you kind of see a lot of similarities between the two. So you were able to manipulate and understand it. Even though the track might be brand new, there was a lot of similarities, but Korea was completely different.
Wow, fascinating.
And Riz, I mean, earlier in the conversation, we were touching on adversity and overcoming obstacles and, you know, creating resiliency. And you know, one question I have for you is that during this time of COVID and quarantine, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a global issue with, you know, how do we cope? How do we get by? I mean, as athletes, I think there's a lot of the average populations, it's fair for me to say that, but the populations are looking upon athletes and saying, okay, they have something of use that we could look at them and learn how to adapt and to cope and having these coping strategies and how to fight through adversity and on and so forth. I mean, during your COVID, you know, time and quarantine here in Calgary, what are some of the things that you've learned from your sport that you might be able to take into your regular everyday life when it comes to, you know, some of the struggles I think that we're all going through?
Yeah. So in my sport, I have had to learn to be completely adaptable to anything. We've had times where we've showed up to a track and they said, oh, just kidding, training's actually in 20 minutes. And we're like, what? It was supposed to be in 3 hours. And so we've had to scramble and get ready. Honestly, the way my federation is run, we get our funding halfway through the summer. So we go from March basically until July and really not knowing what's going on next year, not knowing what tour we're going to be on. I guess me now being at a World Cup and being at the level that I am, I just assume I can make a better assumption, but I still don't know, like, am I going to be doing North America's Cups to start the season before? So I've just had to learn how to be completely adaptable to change on the dime. So the year that I was going to World Cup and I found out 1 month before season started that I wasn't getting a sled and I had to go get a sled. You know, it just creates like a mass panic inside, but and I think the way that most people are, they just it will ruin them, right? And I think at the beginning, I really let it affect me on a personal level, and then I just had to understand that it was part of the sport, and the people who are going to best adapt and have be adaptable in their schedule and be willing to, more than anything, just be willing to be flexible, and just kind of take every day for what it is. And you know what, if we don't get what we need to do done today, we're going to get it done. And It might mean you're going to lose some sleep down the line. It might mean it's going to cost you some money in my sport, but it's going to happen. So, and I think COVID, that was basis of, for, because so many people were just with the uncertainty of what's going to happen next, and how long am I going to be away, and how is this going to affect my family, and how's this going to affect my salary, and am I going to have a job, and I think that the mental health aspect of what COVID has done to people is it's almost catastrophic. And I've seen I've seen some families and through friends and just their parents or even themselves just be beside themselves, and it's really been a tough time for, I think, a lot of people. Even the boredom and not knowing what to do to find their purpose has been really tough. And in that sense of things, I've kind of been grateful to have had this sport, even though it drives me completely bananas, and has been incredibly stressful for the most part. Just being able to manage the stress levels of it, because even from the beginning too, I had a whole summer planned out and A, B, and C, and of what I was going to do in terms of setting myself up financially for the next 2 years leading into the Olympic Games, and those plans completely fell through. So, again, it's one of those things where you have to take a breath, and it's okay to be frustrated. But we have to adapt and change, and just realize that sometimes it's going to be for the best, and everything, and just trusting that everything happens for a reason, I think for me is a big thing, because, at the end of the day, as much as I've had some incredible hardships to get where I need to do, I've still managed to achieve my goals, and maybe it's not quite at the level that I wanted to, but I'm going to have that opportunity again. It just might not be in the way, shape, or form that I wanted it to be or was planning on it to be. So I've been very thankful to have that kind of in my back pocket as a tool just to be adaptable and change. So for me, like with COVID, I've been training, sending videos, had to video everything that I've done in training, and I've been so grateful. I actually have a full gym in my garage that I never used until COVID. It was a roommate setup that they did, and I was just so grateful to have it so I could train like I could, and sending all my videos to my coaches, and them taking the time to go through my videos, offer me feedback. And even though I'm not getting that feedback immediately, so maybe my training session isn't quite as efficient as it would be if I had my coach there cueing me immediately, I'm still able to do the bulk of the work and still able to get it done, and that helped me come back. I'm coming back from injury right now, and I'm stronger than I've ever been, and according to my sprint coach yesterday, it's the best I've ever looked running. So I've kind of turned this negative thing into kind of the most positive that it could be, just based on the circumstances.
So that's cool. It's something we never expected, anticipated, and our ability to sort of react is maybe a little bit like going down the track. It's like, oh boy, what just happened? I better fix it fast. I don't have a lot of time. Yeah. So you have 2 years before the next Olympics?
Not even in a year and a half.
Right, a year and a half. You made a comment that, you had worked on being the perfect athlete, and that had some negative ramifications. So in this next 18 months or so, getting yourself, of course, you always have to qualify, because past performance doesn't do anything for us in the Olympics. How are you taking these next 18 months so that you can get back on the track and represent Canada again in the bobsled and get on that podium? Does 18 months feel like short, long? Like, what are you going to do?
Short. Yeah. Oh yeah. And just being in the sport, and knowing how quick your 4 months of season just fly by, or 4 months of competitive season, I should say. I'm on the ice for about 5 months. It just goes by so quickly. So, and then, so it's like, when I get on the ice this year, I'll probably get on in October, pending. And again, this year is still up, and I have plan A, plan B. Like, are we going to start in October? I don't know. We are socially distant being outside. The problem for us is going to be travel and international travel. Not necessarily the Canadians, but getting the Americans into Europe, or getting anybody here, because anybody here has to quarantine for 2 weeks. So we're still, that could adapt and change. Basically weekly, everything changes. So We just had to cancel our first camp, which was supposed to be the first week of August here, where we were supposed to do our physical testing. So that would be our sprint testing, our timed 30-meter and 60-meter sprints, as well as our max 3RM front squat and our max power clean. And we're going to be doing some push testing there, which we can't get in the ice house yet. So, and again, just trying to get athletes in who, most athletes by now would be living in Calgary, but just due to the circumstances, most people are still at home. We've got a lot of Ontario and Quebec athletes that are still at home. So trying to get them here too has also been, our NSO has recommended that they don't come yet. So we can't be together yet. So we can't do probably the best of training, which is tough because I'm looking and I see on Instagram the Germans are all together training in their training groups and their business as usual. And the Americans they're not, like they're all in different parts of the world and they barely have access to their facilities. So it's just, it's going to be a very interesting year. But at the end of the day, this year is so important because this year will be the first year that based on your standings, you'll get invited at the end of the season. The last race will be on that Olympic track. So we're scheduled to go to Beijing for 3 weeks in the end of February. Is that going to happen? I'm not sure. If that doesn't happen, we might not have an Olympics in a year and a half. It might be 2.5 years. I can see them. They've already postponed the Summer Olympics. I can see them pushing the Winter Olympics because even if you think about the Olympics on a grand scale, for them to have a Summer Olympics in August of 2021 and then in February of 2022, 8 months later, have the Winter Olympics, 2 back-to-back within 8 months. That's never been done before. So I think, it hasn't been done since the early 1990s, I think. I think 92 was the last time that was done. So it's going to be a tough, especially just based on the sponsorships and the way that goes. So again, I'm planning and getting ready full speed ahead because if we have a season, I'm going to be ready. However, in the back of my mind, it's tough because I'm like, will we have a season? I don't really think so. So that year and a half in the leading up to the Olympic Games this year is so important because it's basically like the dress rehearsal for the year. The year of the Olympic Games, all you think about the Olympics. There is nothing else on your brain because the season is so short because you usually have to have 7 races wrapped up a couple weeks before to get everybody's qualifications in. So for example, this year, I'm scheduled to do my first World Cup race will be November 23rd in Latvia. And then I'll end the season March 16th in Beijing on that Olympic track. And that will be our first access to the track. So when we go there, it's not like when I go to a new track that my teammates or my coaches have been to before and they can tell me the program. So even though I haven't been down, I'm told, corner 3 is a 3 pressure corner. Make sure that you're high at the end so you can come out. Or corner 6 is a long sweep and being left. Make sure you actually run in free and then you only steer at the exit. Because I've had my coaching staff has been there, they can tell me the program. So even though I'll have to feel it and figure it out, I know what I'm going to be doing in each corner. When we get to Beijing, nobody's going to know anything. Nobody's seen it. So it's going to be like a little Tetris piece, putting it all together, trying to figure out how we get down and how we go fast and how it's safe and what corners are going to be trouble corners and that sort of deal. So, and I really am looking forward to those 3 weeks as long as they happen. But so this year is a kind of a dress rehearsal and everything is kind of, perfecting the other tracks, really getting in the memory bank, which is important, especially for me missing last year. So everything's going to be a little bit new. I feel like my spidey senses are going to be tingling a little bit more nerve wracking than it would have been, not missing last season, just because every time you go back to a track, you're a little nervous, of course, and that's natural. And actually I'd be more nervous if I wasn't nervous. Just remembering and perfecting, and I write down my program everywhere we go and the steers that I've changed, and I have a detailed log and journal. So that's what I do for this year. And then of course the physical aspect of it is we have from March to get ready for the next season. For your race kind of ends at the end of February. So the Olympic season always starts. So my first race this year is November 23rd. Next year, my first race will probably be October 29th or something like that. Everything starts early. So not only does this year go later, the year after will start earlier. And you just have, it almost works out to 2 full blocks, if you think about training blocks, less to train next summer. So a lot of the work that we have to do this year will carry over into next year, so I can and just get right back into those strength phase powers phases rather than working on general prep at the beginning of next summer. Then another big thing for me I know is I will not be going straight from next season into start training for the Olympic year, because that's what killed me. I thought I started off so strong. I was like, oh yeah, by the time everyone starts training, I'm going to be so fast. No one's going to be able to beat me. And then I burnt out by June. So that will be another important thing. And that's been a really important part of my recovery from injury. It's been a really important part of the way I train now that I'm in my 30s, and versus when I was still 23 and I could just crash and get back in the sled next day and still do my whole thing. So your body's just changing, right? So yeah, recovery has just become a really important thing that I need to focus on. Actually, it's actually a priority for me, and on top of training.
Wow.
Yeah. So Riz, I love where your head's at. You know, you're always preparing, right, for the next step, and because yeah, you're right. You know, the Olympics aren't years; it's really months if you really count them. And so with the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, what we kind of circle back to in the end, and what we really like to know, and our audience really likes to kind of dig in with all these athletes is kind of what we're doing now and how we're chasing tomorrow. Like, what we're always looking ahead as athletes, and what are we doing now in these moments in the next many months, and how are we preparing ourselves for tomorrow. And so that's maybe our last question for you today is you know, Riz, what are you doing, and how are you chasing tomorrow?
You know what? So a lot of my tomorrow, I've had to learn that I can't just be thinking about the next 18 months. I actually have to be thinking about the next 5 years of my life, because there's so many things that I need to do. I probably will retire, maybe not the year after the Olympics, but probably the year after that, just depending on how I do, to be honest. So for me, with all this uncertainty of whether or not we have a season this year, I haven't worked in 4 years, but because I've unable to perform my work, which is public speaking, well, there's no public gatherings. So I've had to go get a job again. I actually went from having nothing to do to having 2 jobs in the last week. So trying to just set myself up mentally for that uncertainty that's going to happen when my sport ends, because being an athlete will end, and I didn't handle it very well the first time around when I was finished being a basketball athlete. Went through some identity issues which led to depression, and now I'm trying to be excited for life. Not only I'm so excited for the Olympics, and that is my priority, but I also kind of like, after I've taken care of my training for the day, I've taken care of my nutrition, my recovery, well, what else can I do? So I went back to school. I'm working on an online certificate in business through Queen's, because my undergraduate degree and what the master's program I was pursuing will no longer be my priority. And so now I've had to start getting a job. So I went back and just waitressing so I can actually have some cash flow. But also on top of that, I'm doing an online experience with Airbnb, which will help my business grow. So trying to think about those little things that will help with my mental health, I think, as well. And then on top of my priority is just being ready for this season, and also being ready for the season, knowing that I don't want to kill myself, because I really want to ramp it up for next year. And knowing what led to the burnout, I'm just making sure that I'm living a well-balanced life right now. So whether that be, you know, I've really done a good job, I think, of remaining in contact with my friends that I haven't been able to see as much as possible, and working on those relationships. So every day I have a plan on what's the most important thing that I have to do that's going to set me up for tomorrow. So today, today my priority is my lift. My second priority is my physio, and my third priority is work so I can make some money. So, and every day it's kind of like a little bit different. So always just setting myself up for looking in ahead, and not just looking to next week, and not just looking to 18 months of the Olympic Games, but also looking to what beyond that, and just trying to be, my goal for myself is I just like to be an efficient human being. I don't want to waste my time. I want to set myself up as best as I can so that I can feel, my goal is when I get to the top of the podium at the Olympic Games, whether they be in 22 or 23, did I do everything in my power to set myself up so I feel ready for this race? Because that removes a big aspect of the uncertainty. Like, am I ready? And that's what I kind of look for, whether am I ready for tomorrow or am I ready for next week? And yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, we're going to follow you along the journey here and stay in touch. We wish you the best. Thank you for spending the time, giving us sort of that insight from both being an Olympic athlete as well as a bobsledder, two things that most of us have no experience with. So I think we learned a lot today, and we thank you for that. So best of luck in the training, and we'll go chase tomorrow with you. Thanks very much, Riz.
I love that.
Thanks,
Thank
Riz.
you guys so much for having me.
See ya.